If I could teach the whole world one thing, it would be the power in trusting your intuition. So much gets led astray because we don't trust our inner knowing and how to access it. And that's the goal here. The Empowered Intuitive is here to bridge the gap in your spiritual knowledge, to open your mind and give you permission to decide what's best for you and the world around you. And I'm here to be real and silly and have fun while doing it. Hi, welcome to another episode of the Empowered Intuitive podcast. I'm joined in the very bottom right corner by my dog, Jinx. She's sitting on my lap, but she wanted to be here. She was sitting around me. I'm like, okay, she never does this, but then doesn't want to be on the camera. I don't know what's going on. I think it's a spiritual thing. Anyways, I'm really excited to talk about today's topic. This has been a theory that I have been pondering for a couple of years now. Basically, I was in this witchy marketing group, and I met a lot of other spiritual and witchy practitioners, and a lot of them were also neurodivergent like me. I have ADHD. I want to get tested to see if I'm even on the autism spectrum. Yeah, that's a whole thing. But there was someone who was talking about, I want to say it was Cosmic Cat on Instagram, but there was someone who was talking about how a lot of intuitive or psychic people or witchy people tend to be neurodivergent. And I found that very fascinating. And I've literally been pondering it ever since then. So I am now feeling ready to, probably waited too long. It's just because I wasn't doing my podcast these past few years, talk about it and see how y'all feel. Because I definitely am going to make long requested, long awaited ADHD episode, because I don't take medication, but I've worked with permission and a lot of the human design stuff that I've learned, that's this is just how you are, so support yourself how you are. And I feel like it's works pretty well, that plus caffeine. But there's if you're neurodivergent, there's so much misconception in our society around what it means to be neurodivergent and how to live your life like that. So we're going to get a little bit into all of that stuff. But first, if you're like, what the hell is neurodivergent? So there's neurotypical people and neurodivergent people. Neurotypical people means their brain operates and works, is wired, communicates in a typical fashion, in a normal fashion. So anyone whose brain doesn't do that is considered neurodivergent. So a lot of people think neurodivergent is just ADHD, but it's not. There's lots of other things that one person could have, like autism. I'm totally blanking, but I'm gonna Google. There's a lot of lists. I don't want to misquote myself. What is considered neurodivergent? Dyslexia, dyspraxia, difficulty with fine motor skills, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette's syndrome. I wanted to say bipolar, but I wasn't sure. Okay, bipolar disorder, Down syndrome, dyscalculia, difficulty with math. Yeah, so basically it's you can see those are different conditions where people, their brain doesn't work normally. Like in dyslexia, your brain doesn't read words and letters normally. We can flip letters, like D's and B's get flipped. That happens a lot for me. I don't think I have dyslexia, but I have certain letters. My stepdad had dyslexia. So yeah, you can kind of see neurodivergent, it's literally your brain is working differently than quote unquote the norm, right? And there's nothing necessarily, this is my personal, I'm mixing science with my theory, right? So I don't think that having any of these things makes you bad or wrong. And I think that's what a lot of the societal norms are. And that's why there's a lot of misunderstanding. Um, Modernly, I will note, because I'm going to talk about how a lot of ancient cultures interacted with these types of people in their role in society. But basically, oh, little Mimo. Basically, in our modern society, a lot of how children are raised and how we're taught is to be subservient, right? To fit into a structure, to listen to authority, all these different things. A lot of people only get diagnosed if they are disruptive at school. So you can kind of see like it's treated as like something that's wrong with you, something that's disruptive, something that is hindering the other students from learning. I never got diagnosed as a child. I had like a late in life diagnosis type thing. Like I learned during COVID, because that's when it became clear to me, was when I started my own business. And I wasn't, at least for ADHD, it thrives with external structures. So in school, you have an external structure. You have to show up at a certain time. You have to go to class. You have homework that's assigned by someone outside of yourself, and you have to show up. And if you don't do that, then you get, a bad grade or whatever. When I was in college, same deal. I obviously had a little bit more structure, less structure in, I could make my own lifestyle. But my first semester, I really fucked myself over with my time management. So I had to really adapt. Um, and then when I was in my regular job, it's like you have to wake up for your job. And if you're late, then your boss is going to get mad at you and all these things. So when I started doing my own business, there was no external structure. I was the one who was responsible for creating that. And it became like abundantly clear that I had like really intense ADHD. So I never got diagnosed because I still got straight A's. I was disruptive in class. I talked a lot. I would get detention. I would get the teacher conference all the time for talking a lot. But being a little smarty pants, I would finish all my work and then I would talk. So when the teacher was like, "Why are you disrupting class? Why are you talking?" I'd be like, "I'm done. I did what you asked me to do. Now I'm on free time." The other kids aren't done. Cool. Like I'm still gonna talk. So that was me as a kid. So I never got diagnosed because my mom was like, "Oh, I'm a talker too. Like it's fine." Like she never bothered with that like note from my teacher. She was like, "Cool. That's the worst that my kid does. Great." So you can kind of see just like societally these conditions or diagnoses are only considered necessary if you're disrupting the norm, right? You're disrupting the neurotypical people. And ancient cultures, I did some research, like Native American cultures, a lot of ancient cultures, where every person had like a role and everyone was, well, I'll use Native American culture as an example because it'll be a little bit easier than being vague. So basically, like in Native culture, and again, I apologize because I don't know what like tribe or what area. I don't know if all of them did it or a few of them, but I read about this. When someone had a propensity, when they showed a propensity for being spiritual or their brain working differently than everyone else, their community would acknowledge that and recognize that, but not as like a bad thing, like you are disrupting the flow of our society. They would actually recognize that these people's brains were wired differently, and they would see it as like a reverent or sacred thing. Because, and this is how I'm going to tie it all together, when you're neurodivergent, and again, this is not every single type of neurodivergence. I am speaking from a place of like the more ADHD autism, because that is like really, really common. I know dyslexia is like the most common one. Shout out to The Office for Meredith for knowing that. For my Office fans, basically like your brain being wired differently means in a lot of cases your brain does not filter out the normalcy of life. a neurotypical person is not bothered by their hair, like how I'm fidgeting with my hair every 5 seconds. A neurotypical person is not necessarily bothered by the fabric of their shirt. The neurotypical people usually can't hear electricity in your refrigerator, in your oven, in your alarm clock, whatever it is. They're not as sensitive to different lights. They're not as sensitive to different sounds. Neurodivergent people, their brain doesn't filter those things out. A neurotypical person's brain will just ignore those things. Like it knows like the shirt is on your body, ignore it. It knows the hairs on your head and on your face, ignore it. That's what a neurotypical brain does, is it filters out for these things very effortlessly and easily. So it's able to, neurotypical people, when they wake up in the morning, generally, and I'm saying a lot of generally and normalies because no one person is the same in how their neurodivergence is. It's all a spectrum. So you have to think about it like, and there is some colonialism in diagnoses and things like that I want to touch on a little bit. But when we dive back into the Native American thing, basically like it's a spectrum. So let's say there's 30 different markers you could have for ADHD. You need to have a minimum of like 10 to be diagnosed. That's not the actual number. I'm just giving an example. So lots of people could have 1 or 2 of these, even 5 of these, and they're not necessarily considered neurodivergent. So that's why I'm saying normally and usually, because with all of this, it is unique. Like I might experience my ADHD differently to someone else. They might not have sensory issues the way that I do. They might not be bothered by the same things that I am. So that's something to note, is like everyone's a little different. So if you're like, wait, I have 1 of these, that's okay. It doesn't mean automatically that that just makes you neurodivergent. It just means you maybe have like a pet peeve or something. Who knows, right? So again, I'm not trying to diagnose people. I'm not a medical professional. I'm just talking about the importance of the medical pieces so that we can get to the theory piece, because it's you have to acknowledge all of it. It's a hypothesis. We have to acknowledge the beginning parts. So basically what you do is, so neurotypical people generally, when they're getting ready in the morning, they don't have to think about their morning routine. They don't have to think about getting up, going to the bathroom, brushing their teeth, washing their face, brushing their hair. They just do the routine. Neurodivergent people, especially people with ADHD, it's like you have to think about it. Your brain has to be like, now what do I do? What is the next step? I don't know, like I have to force myself to do it, right? So there are lots of differences between neurotypical and neurodivergent people. Again, you could have dyslexia and be neurodivergent, and none of this stuff applies to you. So that's why I'm saying like usually, mostly. And my theory mostly is around like a lot of the ADHD and autism people, because there's way more diagnoses of these, way more people identifying as them than perhaps bipolar disorder or dyslexia or different things like that in these spiritual spaces that I'm referring to. So that's why I'm going to be using them mostly as examples, but it's also because that's my life. So I'm speaking from like my experience, because my theory pulls from a little bit of everything. So with the differences in the neurodivergent brain, our brain senses everything. We cannot just turn off from one or the other. And I'm going to put my dog down because she's getting antsy. Say goodbye, Jinx. Okay, she's freaking out. Hello. Oh, there we go. And of course she's like, wait, can I go back? So basically, because your brain cannot filter from the sounds and the sensations and the colors and the textures, there's an additional thing that your brain does not filter out, right? There's a reason why I did this right after the intuitive episode, Intuition 101, basically, because I talked in that episode about how intuition works, how information is in the world around us, in the other realms, wherever you feel that it comes from. And it comes into us like a channel, right? It comes into our body, and then our brain decides whether or not it wants to recognize it and wants to acknowledge that that information is there. So that's with neurotypical people, their brain is so used to filtering things out on the regular, that maybe the theory here is people who are neurodivergent are more intuitive or psychic simply because our brains are feeling that information and not filtering it out and not ignoring it as much. And so we're able to tap into way more than neurotypical people can, because on a normal given day, our brains are feeling and sensing everything in the room: the electricity, the vibe, the color, the light, the sound, the texture, and we can't turn it off. And so we get like really bothered by a lot of these pieces. Now, what happens then when psychic information is coming at us, when intuitive information is coming at us? It's harder for us to turn it off. So we actually acknowledge it more and feel it more and sense it more and experience it more in our life and in our body. That's my theory, because obviously there hasn't been like scientific studies, which, like, if you're a scientist, I would love to study this. I think it would be really cool, because I do think it would be backed by science. But how we talked about how information comes intuitively is that there's multiple theories, but one was like the photons, that there's just photons of information floating around and everybody could tap into that information. We also talked about how that information goes through our pituitary gland, and then our brain kind of like decides what it wants to do with it, right? Like, that is such an interesting thing to look at when a neurodivergent brain doesn't really filter those things. So the neurodivergent brain is going to maybe be more open, be more of an open channel, because on a normal day to day, we are a more open channel. We are feeling and sensing stuff that we don't even want to do, that annoys the crap out of us. Like when I hear electricity, it bothers me. All I can hear, I hyperfixate on it, right? And that's the other thing, the hyperfixation. Struggling to block out things and ignore them. Instead, sometimes we just like hyperfixate. We just like keep focusing on the annoying sound of the electricity over and over and over again until that's the only thing that we can hear. And it's like, ah, then you freak out and you're like, I need to figure out what it is and I need to fix the electricity. So that can also be, brought over to intuition. Like, what if I'm sensing and feeling something and I can't, it's like different than, it's changing and shifting my environment so much that like I can't ignore it because it's bothering me, right? So there can be a spectrum of all of this in this theory that I'm talking about. So my theory basically is that neurodivergent people are more intuitive or more psychic because the way that their brain is wired, right? Because their brain can't or struggles to close out all the external information. Because when we talked about in the last episode, the goal when working with your intuition is to clear your mind and be an open channel to just receive the information. And then what the practice is learning how to be an open channel and learning how to make sense and not ignore the information that you receive. That's why I feel like with neurodivergent people, it's sort of like they're missing a step in that process of having to teach yourself how to do that, because they're already kind of doing it naturally. And the other part of my theory that I find fascinating, going back to the Native American stuff, which I like totally derailed from, is basically that I read that in Native American cultures, when someone was born like this, when they were born with a disability or neurodivergency, it's not just neurodivergency, the culture, the community around them would recognize it and actually honor it as sacred. They would say, you were born different for a reason. Let's find out what that reason is. And I think that mentality for society should really be adopted again. Like, we're not looking at it as like, you can't fit into the norm. You can't be another cog in the machine and in the wheel. So you're annoying. So I'm going to medicate you so that you can like adapt and function in normal society. If our society doesn't have space for every type of person, every disability, every shape, every culture, every race, then it is a broken society, right? And we know this, and people in America specifically, we know that our society does not serve everyone, that everyone does not get an equal seat at the table. And that's kind of what we're realizing, we're seeing put through in our government right now. They're removing stuff for people with the DEI helps people with disabilities, right? Social Security helps people with disabilities. They're trying to overturn, gay marriage and things like that. Like, they're coming for the people that are out of the norm of our society. And that's why our society is so like sick and broken, because we want people to, not we, meaning like capitalism, just wants people to fit into a mold and to just stay in that mold. And now if people are different, they can't even force themselves to be in that mold if they tried, right? They're like, look, I want to operate and work a 9 to 5 job with 90 hours a week, but I have a chronic illness. How am I supposed to do that? My body will deteriorate if I do that. And so these people get unfairly punished by our society for being wrong or different, when in ancient native cultures, they were like, you're different. Why? What is the gift that you were given in your difference? And how can we maximize that difference and support that difference and celebrate that difference? That is kind of what blew my mind, right? Because I grew up in a time where capitalism exists. So I didn't really like know any other version that existed. And when I read that there were other cultures and other times in the world where people were able to do that and did have a model or society that celebrated and found purpose and found belonging for those people with differences, like, I was like, yo, what? Why are we not doing this? I mean, obviously, if you listen to like the What the Fuck is Up America episode, I talk a lot about the systems that capitalism and our government in America has created. I feel like it's relatable for like Canada and the UK too as well. It's not just America, but the systems that our government has perpetuated and created with capitalism, and how they're not actually suited for human joy and human life and all these pieces, right? So now we're starting to see how it's all building together. But basically, like, they would take these people in these native cultures, and they would say like, wow, so you're not tapped into the real world here, you're more tapped into some other realm. Like, let's say you had like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, like you're tapped into some other world that doesn't really exist in this world. Maybe you are a channel for the spirit for the gods, right? They would treat these people as like saying like, your brain works differently and you sense and feel things differently than the rest of us, so that must mean that you have a special gift at sensing these things, at feeling these things, at making sense of these things. So we're going to teach you and hone those gifts and those skills to teach you how to be a channel, how to be sort of like an oracle in a sense. And I found that very fascinating, because it's kind of supports my theory that neurodivergent people are going to be more intuitive or more psychic, because if we're able to tap into everything in the environment around us, if there is an intuitive or psychic thing or information or person, being that is here, we will also sense that. So we have a greater probability and propensity for recognizing, for sensing, for acknowledging that there's at least a change in the environment. But then also, like, if you grow and hone that skill to recognize what that thing is that's in the environment. I really feel like when I'm doing psychic work, I know I had like a gift for it, and that was like communicated to me by like other psychics. But I really truly feel like my ability to recognize differences in my environment on the regular makes it so much easier for me to sense the subtle shifts, the subtle feelings, the words, the images and things when I'm connecting psychically. I feel like if I had a neurotypical brain, I wouldn't even think the same way. Like they say, the other part of my theory that I think is really interesting is there's this new trend, I guess, or new information that I've been reading about, where people have been talking about how important it is to have a neurodivergent person in your workplace, because neurodivergent people don't follow the regular systems. So they are really adept at recognizing. That's the other skill and gift that neurodivergent people usually have, is pattern recognizing. Um, they recognize when patterns and systems are broken and don't work in a space. And because they already inherently don't like fit into those pre-created systems, they actually help to make workplaces better for even neurotypical people, because they say like, hey, why is it like this? Like, we should have this because that's going to make like the culture better or the environment better, like this, thing. And it's because they're like bothered by these things. They're like, I can't just force myself to sit at this desk for 8 hours and be focused. Like, that's crazy, right? And then someone is probably like, okay, great, like let's do a lunch break, like let's have a meditation break, let's have whatever it is, right? Like, they've I've been reading articles where people are saying that like neurodivergent people help make a workplace better because they don't fit into the norm, and they can't accept it because of who they are. It just doesn't work with your body, with how you're wired. So you point out the problems and you recommend solutions to make your neurodivergent experience better, but actually everyone can benefit from that. Even neurotypical people can benefit from neurodivergent things, because neurotypical people still have the ability to sense and feel all these things. Their brain just filters it out. So it's still going to make the environment better. And a lot of these practices and systems are more like neurodivergent people. It's centered on our body and our rhythms and our energy, because we can't really ignore those things and like a regular brain does. So we're like, yeah, I can't focus and I can't sit and do that. Is there another way? Right? Neurodivergent people, I believe, are great reminders that like we all learn differently, we all process differently, we all feel differently, and we should create a space where all those different types of brain processing and learning styles can benefit and thrive, right? So we're seeing how neurodivergent people are treated in the beginning of this episode as like lepers of society, where it's like, oh, like there's something wrong with you because you can't get with the program. But how there are others like ancient cultures, and now like this modern wave that I've been seeing of people realizing, wait a minute, like actually it's useful and beneficial to have someone that doesn't just benefit from how things are and can't just force themselves to be in this system that neurotypical people can force themselves to endure, because they have less distractions and less annoyances and less things that their body like keeps fixating on. So maybe we should listen to them, and maybe we should make space for them, because every time they come into our space, they somehow make it better for everybody, right? Because even if a neurodivergent person isn't bothered by something, their pattern recognizing skills, they're probably observing. They're probably like, I just witnessed like 6 of my coworkers doing this thing. Like, why don't we just fix this so that they don't have to do this thing? Like, they see all these things. And that's where I think it's really fascinating that ancient cultures pretty much understood that, and pretty much like inherent, without knowing the psychology and the science of how our brains are different, they recognize this person is not operating in the bounds of our consideration of normal, and they are struggling to do these things. So what are their gifts? Like, let's put them in a space where they're not struggling, but where we can create a space for them to thrive. And I think obviously this really shows like how broken and sick our society is, that we just cast off people that are different. And it obviously, like I said, makes sense with capitalism. Capitalism doesn't care about humans, doesn't care about your quality of life, doesn't care about you. They just want you to produce more so they can make more money, right? And people with disabilities, chronic illnesses, neurodivergency, they can't get with that program. Their brain and their body's like, absolutely not. It's too hard for me. And I do know for those who have ADHD who are screaming at me like, well, what about hyperfixation and hyperfocus? People with neurodivergency and can like achieve so much, like they can output and do so much more than a human if they're locked in and they're hyperfocused. True. I do I do want to acknowledge that. But on the day to day, right? Like you wouldn't be able to hyper focus in an environment that is garbage, in an environment with loud noises and weird textures and smells and things. Like it would be really hard to do that. So I think it's really interesting how neurodivergent people can craft intuitively just by listening to what their body is sharing about what feels wrong or off in the environment. They can craft a space that is relaxing and suited to, or energizing, whatever you want it to be, suited to the needs of what needs to get done. So that's like one skill that I feel that is not celebrated or looked at for neurodivergent people, right? Like when I go into a space and I'm setting up a meditation, I'm holding space for someone else, I think about all those things because I'm bothered by all of those things. So that means the people that maybe are also neurodivergent will have a better time in my meditation, in my class. And also the people who are neurotypical might feel more relaxed, but not necessarily be consciously aware of why that's the case. And it's probably because I'm thinking about all these things. I'm thinking like, how is the light affecting them? How is the temperature affecting them? Is there weird sounds in the environment? Are these sounds like disharmonious that I'm sharing? Like, for me, like I struggle when I go to a dance class because they make the music so loud during the warm up that I can't hear the teacher calling out the warm up like stretches and things. And that's because my brain can't just lock in and focus on the teacher's voice when the music is louder, right? So when I'm doing a meditation, I think, what is the volume of the music and the volume of my voice? And are they going to be competing with each other? Like how it is when I'm attending a class and I can barely hear the instructor, right? So I'm already crafting a more inclusive space because of my quote unquote difference in society. I'm on the edge of society. So I already am excluded in a lot of ways, and not even in like bad ways. Like I said, I grew up in the system, so I didn't know until I started knowing, right? Until I started learning and making space for who I was, and realizing like, oh my God, this is just who I am. I can't just force myself to be like this. So it's like, because I'm part of that demographic, I'm actually going to create a more inclusive space for people because I'm aware. Like I think like, okay, if I have this disability, what about if my client, is in a wheelchair or struggles to walk? Like, can I provide them? Like I had a client come and I was like, do you want to sit here? Do you want to be here? What is more comfortable for you? I'm already thinking about how can I meet them where they're at? How can I include them and make space for them? And instead of just like doing what's normal and not even needing to question it. So it's interesting in this native like practice, they would say like your brain is tapped into some other realm more than here on earth. So that must mean that the gods chose you to be their communication, to be their channel, to send messages and things through. And so then they work with that neurodivergent person to hone their intuitive and psychic abilities, and then they become the person in their community that is going to be the connection to God, to like they believed in like spirits and elemental energies and like animals and animal spirits and things like that, right? More than like God, one God. But that was so fascinating to me because now, fast forwarding to where I started, being in that witchy group, seeing how many spiritual people who are connected, people who can't fight it and can't ignore it and can't move past it, which everyone is born with intuition. I'm not saying that only neurodivergent people have intuition, but perhaps in this system, neurotypical people can just like get on board with the system a lot easier, which I will note, the system is not healthy by any means. The system takes healthy people and like puts them through all this stuff, and then they develop chronic illness because of it, right? Like I'm not saying that the system is great if you're neurotypical. I think it still needs to be completely fixed because like I said, it doesn't include everyone. It's not a working system if it doesn't include everyone. But their body and their brain is probably like, I could get on board with this 9 to 5. I could get on board with this 40 hours a week. I could get on board with this and this and this and this. And so they might not like ever connect to that intuitive part because their brain is probably like ignoring it or filtering it out, right? And the neurotypical people in these spaces, or neurodivergent people in these spaces, they were tapping into like really cool stuff, like having theories like this, creating cool things, having unique moments with spirit where they were getting, like a download or something. And for those who don't know, a download is kind of like when you just get like a bunch of intuitive information from spirit. Like you're just like, oh, that's why that's the way it is. Or like, you're like, why am I stuck in my healing journey? And then it's like, oh, that's why. Oh my God, this becomes so clear to me, right? And I like, again, when we put all the pieces together about neurodivergent people, it's like the pattern recognition helps them make those aha moments even faster, helps them understand what doesn't work even faster, helps them point out what doesn't serve in the society or the space or the culture even faster, right? Like it's very interesting how, like, I don't know, nobody has really done any, I don't know, if there's a TED talk or a scientific study about this, please send it to me, because there's so much of our society that is like this, that we pretend doesn't exist, and we try and like hide away because they don't fit into the norm, yet they could be holding the keys to our success overall as a society, our change in societal culture and norm that includes and supports everyone, and our renaissance of being centered in spirituality, like how a lot of ancient cultures were, instead of centered in logic and reason, being centered in opening up and listening and being in relationship to your environment, instead of closing down and just trying to control the environment. Like there's so many different ways that neurodivergent people don't fit into our society, but it's like that thing in the workplace. It points out where our weaknesses are and how it's set up and how it's built. And with all of these other skills and gifts, they're honestly like an invaluable asset, right? Like for me as a reader, having this point of view, having this mindset when I approach my sessions with my clients, like I'm able to think about my own lived experience and how I don't fit into a lot of spaces, or I've struggled to feel normal. Like how I said, when I started my business, I realized I had ADHD. Why? I wanted to wake up at 9 a.m. I still wanted to have a 9 to 5 work schedule. I tried to structure my day-to-day and my business around this waking up early, taking your time to have your morning routine, and then doing your work. Literally for a month, every single day, never happened. Never happened. And it was because I struggled with routine. And I will say, knowing your human design can really help you, because I learned that I have all passive arrows in my variables. So like in any passive means no structure, and in human design, active means structure. So like in the 4 spots for how my brain and my body work, all 4 of them were like no structure, no structure. And I haven't met another person who has all 4 of them passive. So let me know if you are, because I would love to connect on that. But like my body was like, well, that's why I think human design, I want to finish that thought. That's why I think human design is important, because it just showed me, it gave me permission. Oh, that's just how you are. Okay, so your body hates structure. Okay, so just like create a life where it's not so structured, but it has a structure. Yeah, anyways. So then learning about ADHD, I was like, wait a minute. Like I have all of these like symptoms or behavioral traits. And then I started to research about ADHD, and I was like, oh my God. And then with the practice that I have, like part of my gift here in this lifetime is to give you permission to accept and love who you are. And part of that is just saying, great, so I have ADHD. So I'm going to accept that these things are harder for me and I struggle with these things. And I'm going to say, how can I support myself to make a lifestyle that works for me, where I'm not waking up every day and blaming myself and judging myself and shaming myself for not being able to operate like a neurotypical person, for not being able to do what the norm of society says, right? For not being able to be like those successful people that share that they wake up super early and they do all these things. Like, yet I'm still here. You know, I started my business around 2019. It shifted. And I'm still here 5-6 years later, having a business, full time in my business. Yet I don't follow pretty much any of the normal rules for like being a successful entrepreneur. And in fact, by acknowledging that I'm different and I'm outside of the norm, I have empowered myself to do my business out of the norm in a way that works for me, because I know that the norm is not set up for people like me. So why should I listen to the normal advice, right? Like, unless I'm listening to another neurodivergent person talking, or a person who knows about these types of other types of people and includes them in their work. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened. I had to build a structure that worked for me. And I also had to give myself some grace around like knowing that I may or may not be able to follow a structure and be able to do this thing that I wanted to do every single day. And so I needed to stop blaming myself for being different and for not being able to just do what normal people say to do and what I thought would be, you know, because I was able to force myself to wake up every day for work because there was the external fear of like my boss will fire me. And I still struggled to wake up and be on time for things, which is a total ADHD thing. But anyways, like when I approach stuff with my own clients, like I carry all of that stuff with me. And so when I'm in readings, one of the most common pieces of advice, besides it being super accurate and scary, that I get is that I've literally had a client, multiple clients, but I'll quote one client, tell me, you know, you're the first psychic that I've been to that has given me actual practical advice on what to do with my problem. Other psychics just told me that I had this issue or this pattern or this problem, but they never told me like, what do I do with it? How do I fix it? How do I approach it? How do I work with it in my everyday life? And because I have this understanding and knowledge and viewpoint and my body and my life and my brain is like this, I also have a Virgo, my Mars in Virgo, so I'm very practical in how I do things. I literally ask. I ask to see what the problem or the pattern is, and I literally ask in my brain, how can they fix that in a way that works for them? I'm not just giving them random advice that's like, oh, well, normal people do this to fix this problem, so you should do that. I'm literally saying like, hold on, I'm getting a call, so I'm going to pause. Okay, sorry. It was the Parks and Rec department. I called because the park where I normally host my events with my business partner, like my sound baths, has been closed until further notice because I think the weather like broke a bunch of branches and things. And so I was like leaving a message to inquire about that and if I could help clean it up. And they were like, no. So love that for me. Love that for park goers. Anyways, what was I saying? So we are talking about neurodivergent stuff. Oh my God, I'm sorry, y'all. Yeah, so when I'm like meeting with a client, I'm thinking about all of these things, right? I'm thinking like, I'm not thinking about just giving general advice like, oh, people say if you have this issue, like meditate 5 times a day or like journal every day. Like I'm thinking about how I'm different and how everyone is unique and everyone has their own flow and their own rhythm, and they need to meet themselves where they're at. Like, because my neurodivergent journey and my understanding of my ADHD journey helped me to realize like, you are just the way that you are, and you should love and accept yourself the way that you are, and build a system to support the way that you are. And now I know that this is like way easier said than done because I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur, so I can create that system. I'm the creator of the system, versus if you're like, hey, I'm over here working for some corporation or some 9-to-5 job, I can't do that. Like I can't follow my own rhythms. And that's why I said like our society is broken, so it's a systemic issue. But also that's why I'm an entrepreneur because I don't want to deal with any of that. Like, I do want to be part of the shift and the change in the society, which is why I talk about it and I be about it. And I'm doing this podcast right now. But I'm also like not willing to wait because I don't think that the system will be completely fixed in the way that I need it to be by the time that I die. So a lot of neurodivergent people tend to be entrepreneurs because of this reason, because their body and their rhythms don't fit into the way that our society has built our rhythms around, which, by the way, I learned the 9 to 5 40-hour work week is built around the man's female, a male body's rhythms, like energy levels, rest levels, hormones, etc. Same with the sleep schedule. The 8 hours of sleep is for male bodies. They're actually finding for female bodies you need like 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Whereas male bodies can survive off of 6 to 8 hours of sleep comfortably, like in terms of like their hormones and their body and nervous system regulation and all these pieces. So literally like over half of the population, because the male chromosome is shrinking, is female, and we have to abide by this system that on a cellular physiological level doesn't even support our rhythms, right? Like females have so much more. We have menstrual cycles and things, and we have way more different hormones than a male body does. And historically, like female bodies are not included in many scientific studies because, well, it was a male dominated industry by design. And they just didn't care enough. They were like, it's too complicated. Like we see that with like people who don't even know like how periods work. Like I saw this tweet that this guy or this woman was like, my husband who's an engineer asked, how do you pee when you have a tampon in? Like literally doesn't know basic female anatomy that you're supposed to learn in school. There's like the freaking Congress people that think that women can turn off their periods and turn them on when they want to. These are people making decisions about our culture and our society and making rules. Like it's scary. But anyways, like all of these rhythms and cycles, like everyone has their own unique rhythm and cycle, and our society doesn't think about the body first, right? It's not people, it's profit. And so we as people are just being thrown through this meat grinder and hoping that we survive on the other way out, hoping that we can make enough money to take enough vacations so that we don't die, hoping that we eat the right thing and exercise and go to the doctor enough so that by the time that we're 80, having put our bodies through all of this stress and trauma, that we don't just die. Which, like, arguably, like we see with the older generations, was not very successful because they didn't even think about that. So, like, when I'm approaching, like, my clients and anything, really, I'm thinking, and this is what a good teacher should do, what does my client need? What does my student need? How can I support them and their needs? And this, if you're a parent or if you're someone who has young children in your life, like a teacher, like that, setting that cycle up will greatly impact people, like teaching them, like, listen to what you need and communicate what you need, right? Because if we all did that instead of just acquiescing to the flow of whatever the system is, our society would include more people and it would be more like supportive for all different walks of life. So that even comes out in the micro when I'm thinking, when I'm asking spirit, like, what do I tell this person about how to help them? What could they do that will mesh well with their life? What is a specific thing that you can tell me that will work for them? And then I give those pieces, like I share that. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm getting. Like, you should try this and this and this. And then I even say, like, but if that's not resonating for you, or if you find that it doesn't work for you, that is totally okay to throw it out the window. Don't hold yourself to this just because a psychic told you to do this, right? Like, I still want them to maintain their power in their own life and their own experience and feel good about that. And I think that this episode started off as why neurodivergent people are more psychic, but now it's sort of like why neurodivergent people are really important in our society, and how seeing where you don't fit in shouldn't be taken as a negative. It should be taken as what is wrong with the system and how do I make it better? That means if I can't fit into this space, then it's not inclusive enough, right? Obviously, we're doing that within reason, right? We're not emboldening people who maybe have really racist ideologies and say like, hey, I don't fit in. There's no space for me. There shouldn't. There shouldn't be space for you if you're bringing racism in here, right? Like, we're obviously using our brains and discernment. I do want to make that clear. Like, we're not just making excuses for shitty things that are not inclusive, because that's a good way to put it. If your ideology is already stemming from a place of not inclusivity, then we don't need to include it. Does that make sense? So it's like, if you're like, ew, why do I need a ramp for this disabled person? That's stupid. I don't think we should have that. That's already not inclusive. So we don't need to listen to your point of view. If you're like, ew, why is this space have other people besides white people? I don't think that should exist. Nope, we're not making space for that, right? Like, so that's already like excluding people in your ideology. We need to move towards a more inclusive space, and like true inclusivity, not like you should just include me even though I'm aligning myself with a Nazi and a racist and all these things. No. We need to address like why you think all these other people should be excluded. That's the issue. So yeah, it's a little bit of both, but I feel neurodivergent people are truly like this linchpin in our society. They are these pure gift givers that can point out where pieces are broken. I'm getting full body chills as I say this. Point out where things don't work, where things are broken, where things aren't supportive. They can tap into these other realms and these spiritual places so easily, and they can pull from these things, and they're usually overly explanatory. Hey, hi, it's me. I'm like the poster child for ADHD over here, because they don't want to be misunderstood in a society that misunderstands them constantly. So they provide extra context to everything. And what does that create? A space where everyone has an opportunity to understand, because we explain it in so many different ways, shapes, and forms that however you learn, you will get that, right? Although I will say this podcast doesn't support people like me who learn through reading and writing. But listening is okay for these types of topics. That's more like if you're showing me how to do something, I need to read and write it. Like I need it, like I can't watch a crochet pattern video on YouTube. It pisses me off to have to watch it. Oh, it pisses me off. It's my manifesting generator, because we like to go from point A to point B the quickest way possible, and then I have to watch a whole video in order to get that one part that I need. It pisses me off. I'd rather have it written out for me in a pattern, and then I can skip to the part where I'm stuck. So anyways, that's a whole thing. But yeah, I want you to ponder about this and think about, like, if you are part of these demographics, like, really support yourself today. Like, let this be a reminder for you that you are important, and you do have a magic, and you do have a skill, and you do have a gift. You just maybe exist in a society that doesn't want to celebrate or make space for you to discover what that is, and support you to keep doing whatever that is. And I'm crying as I say that, because it's really an emotional piece for me, being one of those people. But also it's just like, I'm a Cancer, so it's sad that like people are out here thinking that they're wrong or they're not good enough, when they probably have something really magical that the world has never seen or the world needs now more than ever. Know that whatever space that you're in, if you're part of the edges, the fringes of society, that when you show up, you make that space better. It's your uniqueness, the diversity that makes the space better. So keep making space for your intuition, right? Because that is what's going to guide you to those spaces, those answers, those epiphanies. Keep listening to that. Don't make yourself think that you're crazy because you can tap into something that other people can't tap into. You can hear something that other people can't hear. Like, that doesn't mean that you're wrong or you're bad. That's like a superpower, right? Like, Superman has like super sensitive hearing. Like, we don't say that he's like icky for being able to overhear people. We enjoy that he has super sensitive hearing, and he can just go and hear where the crime is going to be. And stop it. I'm using a really dumb example, but it's like if we could move to realize that maybe for whatever reason we have a neurodivergency, um, we can make the best of it, or we're supposed to have that, right? Because I did listen to a TED Talk that says neurodivergency is sort of like it can develop based off of the environment that you grew up in. Or ADHD can develop specifically based off of the environment that you grew up in. But I know like other stuff like bipolar disorder, that's like a chemical imbalance in your brain that you genetically are born with. It's not something that like develops based off of how you were raised. So there's, each one has their own thing and their own reason. But in embracing why you're like that, and opening up, because you might become like the sage in your community, you might become the psychic in your community, the one that taps into what the collective needs, how to make a space better. All of these things are holistic, and I think of them all as intertwined. Like these upgrades and ideas that you have probably came from intuitive knowings, right? And it's like trusting and opening up more to that, using the ability to just like clear your mind and sense everything as a neurodivergent person. So cool. So cool. I know that we often overthink and have some like 75 thoughts racing in our brain, but that's also what makes you more poised to connect to psychic information, because you're used to being bombarded by a lot of information and receiving all of it, not judging any of it, not filtering any of it, receiving all of it. That's what the key is in spiritual, in psychic stuff. The key is to receive all of the information, then acknowledge it, observe it, then make sense of it. So you're already sort of built to do that. So why are we not supporting that in our society? Yeah. So let me know how this all lands for you. And if you are neurodivergent or neurotypical or whatever, I'd love to hear your input, your stories. Like I said, this is a theory that I have, right? Like there's some science that I pulled from, because I think that the context is important. I wouldn't have a theory just out of, thin air if it didn't make sense to me in some way, shape, or form. Like I literally the other night I got a download. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this. I put it in my notes app. Or notes app. I'm like talking. Well, I guess it's called notes anyways. Oh, interesting. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Okay. So I literally said hyperfixation leads to perfection, because the more you hone in on the mistakes and the rough edges, the better it gets. Slowly fine-tuning to perfection. That's what the neurodivergent people are doing in workspaces, right? And then the other download that I had was people with autism were just ancient culture's record keepers, right? Because they say like, what flavor of autism did you get? I got the one where you're like, not me, but like an example, like, oh, I got the one about trains. Like I hyperfixate on trains and I know the facts about all the trains ever. I think like what happened in a time when encyclopedias didn't exist. It was word of mouth. It was historians, people who organized and remembered things and passed it on. And then we started writing down things, right? But like people with autism, they get hyper fixated on one thing. And I think that, or multiple, but usually at least one thing that they just know a bunch about. Like even for me with ADHD, like I've learned a lot about ADHD. I've learned a lot about spiritual stuff, crystals, herbs. Like I'm fascinated by how all that stuff works. So I've just amassed a bunch of knowledge and now I'm sharing it with you, right? I feel like that's probably how they functioned in ancient society. Like maybe if you had autism in an ancient society, you became like the historian. They were like, oh my God, you can remember shit like so well. Like I'm just going to have you remember all this stuff. And then you'll be able to tell and recall for everyone and share it forever for other people as we continue on. Right. I feel like it's so interesting, like thinking about other ways that people could like exist in a society. Like imagine if you were on the spectrum for autism and you're like, okay, this is my hyperfixation, and then like maybe there's like an autism foundation that's sort of like a university or something, and you like register yourself as like, I'm the one who like hyperfixate on like food appliances, like kitchen appliances. And then like people could reach out to you and be like, yo, like I'm trying to develop this kitchen appliance. Like, what can you tell me? And like you would be able to pull and be like, oh, in 1976, we had this version and that version. You know, it's like, wow, that would be so cool if like that was your job, was to just follow what you were interested in. And then that's your role in society, is to help people with your knowledge that you've amassed by being on the spectrum. Like, not by being on the spectrum, but because you're on the spectrum, you're like drawn to this. And it's like, wow, cool. Like there's a guy that my partner showed me on TikTok. I think he's blind, but I think he's on the spectrum, or he's just like a really cool scientist, and he specializes in user experience. He is on the fringe of society. He has a disability, right? And he, because he cannot see, has to interact with things through all of his other senses. So he is hyper aware of how people, even neurotypical people, interact, how they're, even though they're not consciously aware, how they interact with like all these different things in our society. And he will make these really cool videos that like he breaks down like, why is this brand's like can opener so satisfying to use versus the other brands? Let me tell you how our body and our brain and everything like interacts and senses with this thing. Boom. Like, it is crazy like how little we value the people who live on the fringes, but how they are literally like the key holders to our thriving society. So again, this is sort of like a love letter to y'all. I hope that this episode finds all the neurodivergent baddies, all the people who are, you know, different in some way, shape, or form and feel like they don't fit in, and that you find a little piece of belonging here now with me in your life and in your heart. Like, take that sense of belonging. Again, I'm crying. Take that sense of belonging and carry that with you, because there's a reason why you're like this. And we should just celebrate and honor it and support the way that you are, and find ways to keep supporting more people like that. Okay, well, that was like a double goodbye because I remembered something at the end, very ADHD of me. So if you've listened through the second goodbye, I'm eternally grateful for you. And I look forward to speaking with you next week. Bye. Thank you for listening to your intuition and listening to the Empowered Intuitive podcast. I would absolutely love it if you could leave a review on Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts. Subscribe or follow the pod wherever you stream, and legit just tell all your spiritual baddie friends and fam about us. You can follow the Empowered Intuitive Pod on IG at the Empowered Intuitive Pod. For updates and fun memes, follow our host Love on IG and TikTok at Love Sakratoff. That's LOVESACHARTOFF. Or head to their website to subscribe to their newsletter, book a session, or attend an upcoming event with them at lovesakratoff.com. And remember, trust your intuition.